There is no word in the high Gothic of the Imperium that carries the weight, the dread, and the finality of Exterminatus. To speak it aloud is to pronounce the death sentence of a world. It is not a campaign, not a siege, not even a war. It is the deliberate erasure of a planet from the annals of existence, an act of such absolute finality that not even ash or ruin is meant to remain. When the order is given, it means the Imperium has abandoned hope, abandoned mercy, abandoned even the faintest thread of redemption for the world in question. To the common citizen, the word is a whisper in prayer or curse, the darkest of shadows at the edge of rumor. To a commander of the Imperium, it is the ultimate tool of control, wielded rarely, but with such devastating consequence that its echo resounds across centuries. Imagine the sky torn open by cyclonic torpedoes, the seas boiling into vapor, the very crust of the planet cracking like brittle bone. Imagine the millions who in their final moments scream prayers toward Terra, never to be heard. This is not conquest. This is annihilation. This is Exterminatus. If the grim shadow of Exterminatus compels you deeper into the heart of Warhammer 40,000, then stay with us. Subscribe, share, and keep this channel alive, for every echo of your support strengthens our reach through the endless void. The world had already begun to rot long before the fleet arrived. From the ground, the people of Hive Tarsus could not see the gathering shadows above, nor could they sense the deliberations of admirals and inquisitors that weighed the value of their existence like numbers scratched onto a slate. For them, life continued in the only rhythm they had ever known. The thrum of the manufactoria, the endless clatter of gears and pistons, the heat of furnaces exhaling promethium fumes into a sky already sick with ash. Generations had lived and died within these walls, never seeing the stars, never questioning the authority of the Aquila banners that hung over every thoroughfare. The hive itself groaned like a living thing, towers stacked upon towers, EB blocks rising in dark geometric forests of stonecrete and metal. Every corridor crowded with the faceless press of humanity. Each day began with the same ritual, the tolling of bells, the crackle of vox speakers, the voice of the ministorum priest urging loyalty and prayer before labor. Men and women bent their heads, some from devotion, others from instinct, their lips murmuring the litanies of obedience as incense drifted through the air thick with soot. To falter in prayer was to invite suspicion, and suspicion meant the commissariat's cold attention. It was easier to let the words tumble from the tongue like habit, even if faith had long since withered beneath hunger and exhaustion. Still, in the dim chapels carved into the hive's underbelly, there were always those who clung fiercely to belief, eyes fever bright as they gazed upon candles guttering before crude icons of the emperor. Life was survival measured in rations and shifts. Children labored as soon as they could stand, feeding raw materials into machines that would grind them down into components for laser guns or armor plating destined for wars in systems they would never hear of. The overseers barked orders through vox grills, their voices distorted and inhuman, and the lash of servitor enforcers maintained rhythm with merciless precision. Rest was stolen in overcrowded dormitories where the air tasted of oil, metal, and sweat, where the cries of newborns merged with the coughing of the sick. Yet even in this crushing existence, there was a strange persistence of humanity. Laughter whispered over contraband cards, songs hummed in defiance beneath the roar of machinery, and fleeting moments of tenderness hidden in the labyrinth of steel corridors. Rumors seeped through the hive like leaking water. A neighbor taken in the night by arbitrators, a factory line shut down because the machines had begun to twist metal into grotesque shapes. Whispers of mutations, of disappearances, of strange symbols scratched into walls where no hand should have reached. The priests spoke louder and louder each day, their sermons thick with fire and warning, urging the faithful to redouble prayers lest heresy fester within. Commissars tightened their grip, their bolt pistols ever ready to silence doubt before it could become rebellion. To most, these were only the ordinary storms of Imperial life, endured like hunger or disease. Few truly believed their world might be sliding toward the edge of judgment. For some, the first sign was the silence of the stars. Astropaths grew pale and shivering, their eyes clouding with blood as they murmured fragments of voices only they could hear. Dock workers at the upper tiers of the hive reported that fewer ships entered orbit. Fewer cargo haulers came to exchange goods. The markets shrank, and with them, the rations. Tensions rose in the hab levels, where riots began to flicker like sparks that the Arbites swiftly crushed beneath armored boots. Still, the sense of unease remained, lingering like the smell of smoke before fire. Somewhere in the vaulted chambers of the ecclesiarchy, priests argued over portents, over visions of wings burning in the night sky, over dreams of cities sinking beneath oceans of flame. Yet none of these omens stopped the daily procession of labor. The hive moved forward because it had no choice. To stop was to die. Mothers still whispered to their children, urging them to recite the prayers of protection before sleep. Men still dragged their bodies to the manufactoria, lungs raw from fumes, hands blistered and scarred, knowing their absence would condemn not only themselves, but their entire family line. The rhythm of life in Hive Tarsus was a liturgy of suffering, an endless chant of flesh into machine, machine into weapon, weapon into war. No one could have imagined that this liturgy would soon end, not with liberation, not with change, but with silence absolute. For above them, though hidden from sight, the decision was already made. An inquisitor had marked their world. A word had been spoken into the void, sealed in the archives of a battle fleet's command deck. The sentence hung like a blade poised to fall. Down below, the citizens of Tarsus continued to pray, to laugh, to suffer, and to sin, never realizing that they were already ash in the eyes of the Imperium. The outer levels of Hive Tarsus were a place where only the desperate lived. The spires and hab blocks clawed toward the polluted clouds like broken fingers, and the wind howled through them with a voice of iron and dust. Here, the light of the false sun lamps barely reached, flickering dimly over rusted gantries and walkways slick with grime. Families carved out survival in forgotten corners, patching broken walls with scavenged scrap, their eyes always alert for enforcers or worse, the press gangs of the local gangs who ruled the upper wastes with brutality. Children were born and raised here who never once descended into the manufactoria proper, who had only heard the roar of the great furnaces as distant thunder, a reminder that below them lay a hive that ate its own to survive. The priests did not come often to these upper levels. Their sermons were wasted on hollow-eyed laborers who saw faith not as salvation, but as one more tax to be extracted. When preachers did appear, their words were met with jeers or silence, their Aquila icons defaced in the night by symbols the Arbites scrubbed away each morning. Here, devotion turned to resentment, and resentment sometimes turned to worship of darker powers. A whispered promise of escape, of power, of vengeance upon the commissars and priests who had ground them into dust. In every hive there are cracks, and through those cracks corruption seeps. One woman, Murata, remembered the day her husband had been taken. He had faltered in his shift, his body breaking under years of toil, and the overseer had marked him for culling. They dragged him away to the lower levels where servitors were made, where flesh was stripped of will and bound to steel. Murata never saw him again, but sometimes, when she passed the manufactoria gates, she swore she could hear the droning chant of his voice, mechanical and endless, reciting work litanies through a vox grill. It was in that moment her prayers began to falter. When she whispered the words of the creed, they tasted like ash. And when she heard another voice, soft and insidious in her dreams, offering freedom, she did not resist. She was not alone. Meanwhile, in the lower depths where the Manufactoria fed the Imperium's wars, the signs of decay grew stronger. Machines misaligned despite constant litanies of maintenance. Servitors malfunctioned with disturbing irregularity, and shipments failed to meet quota. The tech priests of Mars, their faces hidden behind brass masks and their limbs more machine than flesh, declared that the errors were not of their making. They intoned Binharic prayers over the cogitators and blessed the machines with sacred oils, but still the flaws multiplied. Their suspicions turned outward, blaming sabotage, heresy, or unseen warp taint. Whispers spread that an inquisitor had arrived in secret, cloaked and silent, watching, recording, tallying sins. For the people of Tarsus, none of this mattered. Hunger did not pause for omens. Men still lined up for ration cubes that shrank each month, their children's ribs showing through thin skin. Fights broke out over scraps, Arbites firing shock mauls and stubbers into crowds to restore order. Corpses were carted away to the reclamation pits, their flesh rendered down for oils, and their bones for fertilizer. Even death served the hive. This was the truth every citizen understood. Even if the ecclesiarchy wrapped it in scripture, life was debt. And that debt was paid in blood and toil until the emperor called them to his side. But there were those who sensed more. Astropaths screamed in their sanctums, clawing at their own faces until their eyes bled. Vox traffic flickered with bursts of static that some claimed were voices, prayers twisted into threats. In the skies, workers swore they saw shadows moving against the stars, black shapes that blotted out constellations for heartbeats at a time. And then came the tightening of restrictions. More Arbites patrols, commissars posted on every factory floor, priests doubling their sermons, their voices hoarse with warnings of heresy. The world had been marked, though few understood what that meant. A rumor spread like wildfire through the hive. Exterminatus. The word was spoken in alleys, in Manufactoria dormitories, in the hidden cells of cults and the crowded queues for rations. Some dismissed it as impossible, a story to frighten the weak. Others clung to it with a kind of grim hope that their suffering might finally end, even in fire. The priests denied it, calling the word blasphemy. The commissars executed those who spread it. But rumors are like sparks, and the hive was already dry tinder. Marata heard the word whispered by her child as they huddled together in the dark, and she felt both dread and release. What could be worse than this life? What could be worse than watching her child cough blood, waiting for ration lines that ended in empty hands, knowing that her prayers reached no one? When she looked at the Aquila stamped above her doorway, she wondered if the Emperor looked back, or if the symbol was only steel and shadow. Somewhere deep within her, a thought began to bloom, dangerous and irreverent. Perhaps fire was not an ending, but a kind of truth. Above, in the void, the ships watched in silence. The people of Hive Tarsus lived, fought, prayed, and died, never knowing that their fates had already been sealed. The word they whispered in rumor had already been written in orders, stamped with sigils of authority, and placed in the hands of men who believed they acted with divine sanction. Exterminatus, the blade poised above them, invisible yet inevitable. Night in Hive Tarsus was not true night. The great lamps that hung in the upper spires never ceased their pallid glow, casting a dim and sickly radiance through layers of smog and ash. Darkness in the hive was a matter of depth, of distance from the failing light. In the lower habs, shadows stretched long across stonecrete corridors, and in the depths below the Manufactoria, night was absolute. There, among dripping pipes and rusted bulkheads, humanity became little more than murmurs in the dark, huddled shapes with hollow eyes, breathing the reek of oil and rot. It was in these depths that the first riots truly began. The Arbites marched in their black carapace armor, shields gleaming with the twin-headed eagle, shock mauls sparking as they advanced. They were relentless, silent, faceless beneath their helms. To the rioters, they were not men but engines of order, expressions of a power that could not be reasoned with. Bolters roared in narrow streets and bodies fell into the mud. Fires were lit, but the flames only spread smoke into a sky already choking. The Arbites crushed resistance with efficiency, yet their presence became constant, their boots echoing on every tier, a reminder to all that something was deeply wrong. In the manufactoria, production quotas doubled. Overseers demanded impossible numbers, and when machines failed, it was the workers who paid. Men collapsed at their stations and were dragged away by servitor claws, their corpses stripped for reclamation. Women were whipped for faltering, their screams drowned by the clatter of gears. Priests patrolled the lines, swinging censers heavy with incense, their chants urging loyalty, urging sacrifice, urging faith. But faith faltered when hunger grew sharp, when children cried through the night, when rumors thickened into conviction. Exterminatus. The word was now carved into walls, painted in blood on hab-block doors, whispered in the ears of sleeping children. For the common people, fear and disbelief wrestled in every heart. How could the Imperium, the great protector, the divine hand of the Emperor himself, destroy one of its own worlds? How could prayers end in fire? Yet others claimed it was justice, that their sins had grown too great, that mutation, heresy, and corruption had called down divine wrath. They whispered of cults spreading like disease, of sacrifices made to the dark gods in the hidden tunnels. Some said the very air was poisoned not by industry but by the warp, that Tarsus itself had become a wound upon reality. If such things were true, then perhaps fire was mercy. Marata watched her child cough blood into a rag and felt the weight of those words. She no longer dreamed of salvation. She no longer whispered the creed. When she heard the rumors of cults, of gatherings in the dark where new prayers were spoken, she did not recoil. She listened. She wondered, if the Emperor had abandoned them, perhaps there was another power that would not. And in the shadows of her thoughts, a voice whispered back, promising warmth where there was only cold, promising release where there was only pain. Yet not all lost themselves to despair. Commissar Vorin, a man carved from iron discipline, stood each morning before the mustered workers and recited oaths of loyalty. His bolt pistol gleamed beneath the dim lights, and his voice carried with a certainty that could not be shaken. He told them that Tarsus was strong, that rumors were lies, that faith would shield them. His eyes, however, betrayed the truth. When he returned to his quarters alone with his thoughts, he stared into the flickering glow of a candle and wondered if he was lying not only to his men, but to himself. Somewhere above the clouds, in the void black as an executioner's hood, warships waited. Their torpedo bays were already primed, their cyclonic warheads slumbering in cold silence. Servitors checked their payloads with mechanical precision, chanting litanies in monotone voices. Tech priests moved among them, red robes whispering across metal decks, their Binharic hymns rising in praise of destruction yet to come. And in the heart of one vessel, behind sealed doors heavy with wards and sigils, an inquisitor knelt in prayer. He prayed not for forgiveness, for he believed none was needed. He prayed for strength, for clarity, for the Emperor's hand to guide him as he signed the death warrant of a world. Down below, the people of Hive Tarsus prepared for another day. Mothers kissed their children awake. Men trudged toward the manufactoria. Priests raised their censers high. The hive groaned and breathed and labored, unaware that their prayers no longer mattered. The blade had already fallen. They simply had not yet heard it strike. Thus ends the days before the fire, Thus ends the last chapter of ordinary life on Tarsus. Soon the sky itself will open, and the faithful, the faithless, and the damned alike will be swept into the silence of ash. The seal broke with a sound like tearing skin. A scroll of vellum, stamped with the sigil of the Inquisition, unrolled across the oak table. Inquisitor Kael Vedran's gloved hand lingered over the parchment, his black eyes narrowing, as though he could pierce the words themselves, as though they might yet yield some reprieve if stared at long enough. They did not. The order was absolute, exterminatus. No caveats, no addendum, no plea for further investigation. The High Lords had sanctioned it, the Ordos had confirmed it, and the fleet was already in orbit. The words were carved in the ink of finality. Hive-world Tarsus was to burn. Kael closed his eyes, drawing a slow breath. He was not a man easily moved, for he had seen planets die before, had wielded the Emperor's justice against billions. Yet each world had left a scar, and this scar, he feared, would cut deeper than most. Tarsus was not a backwater moon crawling with genestealer taint, nor a heretic-held fortress steeped in chaos iconography. It was an imperial world, loyal on parchment, devoted in creed. Its manufactoria supplied arms to 3 sectors. Its tithes fed entire crusades. To destroy it was to amputate a limb from the Imperium itself. And yet, the whispers of corruption ran like rot beneath its surface, spreading faster than Kyle's agents could confirm. If the rot was true, then the world was already lost. If false, then 1 billion souls would die for nothing more than suspicion. He lifted the parchment, holding it to the lumen's flickering glow. His gauntleted thumb brushed the red sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. In the wax, the twin-headed Aquila spread its wings wide. Its eyes seemed to look back at him, judging, waiting. Behind him, the chamber stirred. The ship's captain, Admiral Lycian, stood stiffly at attention. His uniform was immaculate, his chest heavy with medals earned across a lifetime of void war. Yet there was unease in the way he shifted his weight, the tightness around his jaw. "You have read the writ, Lord Inquisitor?" Lycian asked at last. His voice was careful, too careful. "I have," Kael replied, his tone measured. "And your command?" Kael did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the viewport, where the void stretched endless and cold. Beyond the glass, Tarsus lay shrouded beneath its ashen clouds. A world of flickering lights and endless towers, alive with industry and faith and hunger. To Kael it looked almost peaceful, the calm before the pyre. "I will convene the council," he said finally. "The writ is absolute, but its execution falls to me. And I will not damn a world until every doubt is scoured." Lycian hesitated. Few men dared hesitate before an inquisitor, but Kael saw the flicker in his eyes. "With respect, my lord, the fleet is primed. The ordnance is armed. To delay is to ensure justice, Admiral." Kyle cut in, his voice cold steel. "We are not executioners without cause. We are the Emperor's hand, his judgment." Lycian bowed stiffly. "As you command." When the Admiral left, silence reclaimed the chamber. Kael placed the writ back upon the table, smoothing the vellum flat. He stared at it for a long while, then allowed himself a whisper, so quiet even the vox recorders in the walls would not catch it. "Emperor, preserve me. For I do not know if I do right." Elsewhere in the fleet, the murmurs had already begun. Captains whispered of the writ. Commissars drilled their men with renewed zeal. Tech priests blessed the cyclonic torpedoes with Binharic hymns, their incense staining the air with chemical sharpness. Some prayed with fervor, eager to enact the Emperor's wrath. Others feared the stain upon their souls. None dared voice dissent. None, save Kael himself, though his voice was but a whisper against the storm. On the surface of Tarsus, the Arbites cracked skulls in the streets. Priests shouted louder sermons. Manufactoria ran day and night, heedless of the fact that soon none of their work would matter. And in the depths, in the hollows where the Emperor's light never reached, cults gathered. They carved their symbols into steel walls. They whispered names not meant for human tongues. Some prayed for salvation, others prayed for vengeance, all prayed for fire. The council chamber was a cold vault of iron and silence. A single lumen strip flickered overhead, throwing long shadows across the polished floor. Inquisitor Kyle stood at the head of the table, the writ of Exterminatus resting like a blade between them all. Around him gathered the key voices of the fleet. Admiral Lysion, his jaw tight with military discipline. Magos Engenzir Dorex, half his face a lattice of augmetics still oozing sacred oils, and Chaplain Severian of the Black Templars, his armor black as voidstone, a censer of incense swinging from his gauntleted hand. Kale let the silence grow. Let it choke the chamber until it pressed like a weight upon each man's chest. Only when he saw them stir did he finally speak. You all know why you stand here. The writ is clear, the Emperor's will, as spoken by the Ordos. Yet we stand on the brink of fire, and I ask you this. What do you see when you look to Tarsus? Severian's voice was the first to answer, harsh and unyielding. I see a world that must burn. Faith cannot falter, not for an instant. If there is corruption, and there is always corruption, then it festers. It will spread. Better to scour the flesh entire than risk contagion. Mercy breeds weakness. The Emperor's enemies deserve no mercy. His censer clanged against his breastplate, smoke spilling into the air like the breath of a tomb. The words hung like iron. Dorex's mechadendrites clicked, servo claws twitching as though agitated. His voice was a rasp of vox distortion, modulated into a monotone. I see inefficiency. The manufactoria of Tarsus have fallen behind in their output quotas. Data records show tithes increasingly irregular. Productivity decreases as heretical algorithms infiltrate their networks. To preserve efficiency, annihilation is acceptable. Kale turned then to Lysion. The Admiral's lips thinned, his eyes cast to the floor for a heartbeat before he spoke. I see duty, my lord. I am the Emperor's sword, not his judge. If the writ commands fire, then my ships shall deliver fire, but... He hesitated, a flicker of humanity breaking through the iron of his voice. I see lives, billions, soldiers who marched without complaint, workers who fed our armies, children who prayed beneath cathedral spires, and I ask if their voices were ever heard before this writ was sealed. Silence reclaimed the chamber. Gale let it linger. The writ is law, Severian growled, as though that alone answered all. The writ is law, Kale agreed, his voice sharp enough to cut. But law without truth is tyranny, and tyranny is no tool of the Emperor's light. He let his hand rest upon the parchment. We have days before the torpedoes fall. I will use them. We will scour the evidence, scour the truth. And if corruption festers deep, then let the world burn to ash and cinder. But if this writ is born of error, of fear, of misguidance, then perhaps for once the Emperor's hand can stay. The chaplain bristled. Heresy! Kale met his glare without flinching. No, vigilance. The Emperor demands vigilance, not blindness. The tension was a blade's edge. Lysion's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Dorex's augmetics whirred in quiet unease. Severian's censer swung wider, the smoke cloying. And then slowly, grudgingly, the chaplain lowered his gaze. He did not yield, not truly, but he did not strike. Kyle turned from them all, eyes settling once more on the viewport. Below, the planet's lights blinked like stars across its night face. For a heartbeat, he imagined the laughter of its people, the ringing of hammers in the forges, the songs of the faithful in their chapels. For a heartbeat, he imagined hope. But hope was a fragile thing in the Imperium. It seldom survived the weight of orders. He raised his hand, signaling the end of the council. Prepare the fleets. Maintain readiness. But until I speak the final word, no fire falls. The chamber emptied one by one. boots echoing against the iron floor. Cale remained, alone with the writ, the parchment like a wound upon the table. He pressed his hand upon it, not in acceptance, not in defiance, but in silent prayer. "Emperor, guide me," he murmured, "for the burden is heavier than I can bear." The days that followed were a crucible of whispers and waiting. Cale moved through the decks of the flagship as though walking a cathedral of iron, every bulkhead groaning under the weight of silence, every passing crewman's gaze filled with unease. Word of the writ had bled through the ranks despite attempts at secrecy. The rumor of Exterminatused was a poison. It seeped through mess halls and barracks, spreading like a contagion of dread. He passed corridors lined with ratings kneeling in hushed prayer, their knuckles white as they clutched rosaries engraved with the Imperial aquila. In the lower decks, servitors dragged crates of ordnance whose destination no one dared name aloud. In the vox crypts, adepts muttered in binary cant as they encrypted orders with hands that trembled. The entire ship had become a waiting tomb, its crew suspended between life and the promise of annihilation. Cale sought not the gaze of generals, nor the council of priests in those hours. He walked among the common men and women, hidden beneath a hooded cloak, listening to their murmurs. A mother spoke softly to her child of a home she would never see again, her words trembling, as though she already tasted the ash of loss. A soldier whispered his fear of dying not in glorious battle, but as nameless dust beneath a firestorm unleashed by those sworn to protect. Cale carried these voices like chains across his soul. Each one deepened the weight of the decision that lay before him. In the librarium, he bent over data slates, dragging secrets from the archives of the Inquisition itself. Tarsus had been marked before, years past, but never condemned. Its tithes had faltered during orc raids. Its governors had been suspected of corruption. Yet time and again the planet had clawed itself back into service. What had shifted now? Why had this final, irrevocable judgment fallen so suddenly? One name appeared again and again in the footnotes of those reports. Cardinal Hestian, a man whose sermons thundered across half the sector, demanding stricter faith and purges of all who wavered. His influence had grown in recent years, his zeal louder than the measured tones of the administratum. Had his voice tipped the balance, his cries of heresy too loud to ignore? Or had the Inquisition itself uncovered some rot deeper than the public eye could see? Cale read until his eyes burned, but truth eluded him, hiding between the lines like a shadow that mocked his reach. On the third night, he sought the solitude of the chapel aboard the flagship. The candles burned low, their flames guttering against the drafts of recycled air. The icon of the Emperor loomed over him, cast in bronze and shadow, its eyes hollow yet piercing. Cale knelt, resting his forehead against the cold stone altar. "Master of mankind," he whispered, "I am your servant, but I am also your weapon. A weapon must strike true, or it becomes a danger to the hand that wields it. If I am to condemn Tarsus, let me be sure. Let me not mistake zeal for truth, nor silence for obedience." The silence of the chapel was his only reply, broken only by the low hum of the ship's reactors. Yet in that silence, Cale felt both the crushing weight of abandonment and the faintest glimmer of resolve. He rose, his jaw set, his hand tightening around the Aquila pendant at his neck. He would descend to the surface of Tarsus himself. He would see with his own eyes whether the planet deserved to burn. The preparations were swift. A shuttle cloaked in secrecy. A retinue pared down to only those he trusted most. Lysion, wary but loyal, provided the means. Dorex lent servitors to mask their descent from orbital auspex. Severian spat curses, calling the act folly and weakness, but he did not prevent it. And so, beneath the cover of night, Cale's craft slipped through the void. Cutting through atmosphere like a blade of judgment, the fires of Tarsus spread out beneath him, city lights shimmering like a false constellation. For a heartbeat, they looked like stars. For a heartbeat, they looked like hope. And then the shuttle broke through the clouds, and Kale saw what lay beneath. The shuttle touched down in the shadow of an abandoned manufactorum, its walls rising like skeletal fingers against the night sky. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid tang of promethium, every breath a reminder that the forges of Tarsus had not slept in years. Gael disembarked with his retinue of trusted acolytes, the hiss of hydraulics and the rasp of boots on ash, the only sounds to greet their arrival. The world was alive, but it felt haunted, as though it already anticipated its death. The manufactorum's interior loomed vast, lit only by the glow of still smoldering furnaces. Broken servitors shuffled blindly in the gloom, their vox grills mumbling fractured liturgies as they dragged rusted tools across cold stone. Each one was a parody of devotion, a machine's husk clinging to fragments of a purpose long decayed. Kale's eyes narrowed at the sight. He had seen worlds broken by inefficiency, by corruption, by heresy. But here he sensed something stranger, something desperate. They pushed deeper into the manufactorum, following the faint hum of machinery. In a chamber still hot with labor, they found workers slumped over their stations, bodies frail from starvation yet hands still bound to their tasks. Chains clinked softly where wrists had been shackled to levers. Overseers with hollow eyes stood guard, their last pistols drawn but their spirits broken. No songs of rebellion, no banners of defiance, only the endless, joyless rhythm of toil. Kale stepped forward, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Why do you still labor when your world stands condemned?" One worker lifted his head, his face sunken, his lips cracked. His answer came as a whisper. "Because we were told to. 'Cause the Emperor requires it. Until he says otherwise, we serve." The words struck Kale like a blade. These were not traitors, not heretics exalting the dark gods in shadow. These were faithful souls who clung to obedience even as death drew close. As they left the manufactorum, Kale's retinue walked in silence. None dared to meet his gaze, for they all knew what they had seen. The writ spoke of corruption, of rebellion festering in Tarsus, but the truth unfolding before them was different. It was not heresy that consumed the planet. It was exhaustion. It was desperation. It was the crushing weight of tithes and demands that no world could sustain forever. They moved next through the hab blocks that rose in tiered towers of concrete and grime. In cramped rooms, entire families huddled together, their prayers echoing off walls smeared with soot. A young girl clutched a doll fashioned from rags, its stitched eyes worn away by years of use. She held it to her chest as though it could shield her from the fire to come. Her mother's voice trembled as she led a litany of devotion, her words faltering only when the tears overcame her. Gale stood at the threshold, unseen, listening as they prayed not for deliverance but for strength to endure what they believed was the Emperor's will. Outside, the night sky was alive with smoke rising from the hives. Gael turned his gaze upward, toward the void where the fleet hung poised with its payload of fire. From this ground, the thought of Exterminatused was not abstract. It was a storm waiting to fall, a blade suspended by a thread. His acolyte, Vera, spoke at last, her voice low. "They believe, my lord. Even knowing death is coming, they believe." Kale's jaw tightened. Belief is not the question. The question is whether their belief has been betrayed. He felt the writ heavy in his mind, its words echoing like a sentence not yet read aloud. Perhaps Cardinal Hestian had spoken truth. Perhaps the planet hid rot so deep even faith could not mask it. But what Kale had seen was not treachery. It was loyalty weaponized against its own people. When dawn came, the shuttle returned them to orbit. As the atmosphere fell away and the curve of Tarsus shrank beneath them, Kale could not silence the images imprinted in his thoughts. The shackled workers, the whisper of obedience, the child's ragged doll, each one a reminder that to order the fire was to extinguish not rebellion, but devotion. Back aboard the flagship, Severian awaited him in the hangar, his black armor looming like judgment incarnate. The chaplain's voice was a growl that carried across the chamber. "You went seeking weakness, and you found it. They are weak, Inquisitor. Weakness is a greater heresy than any whispered prayer to the ruinous powers. The Emperor's hand must strike." Kyle brushed past him, his voice low, yet edged with steel. "Or perhaps it is not weakness I found, Chaplain. Perhaps it is faith stronger than yours." The chaplain's gauntlet flexed against the hilt of his crozius. For a heartbeat, violence shimmered between them like heat on steel. But Kale did not slow his pace. He walked on, the burden heavier than ever. The writ still waited. The torpedoes were still primed. And the Emperor's judgment had yet to be spoken. The days stretched into a tense silence, each hour measured by the steady hum of reactor cores and the distant echo of shipboard hymnals. The fleet orbited above Tarsus like carrion birds circling their prey. And below, the planet carried on beneath the shadow of judgment. From orbit it was still beautiful, still alive. Oceans reflecting starlight, cities burning bright with clustered hives, rivers of fire tracing the scars of Manufactoria. Yet Kale knew that if the order was given, all of it would be erased in a matter of hours. The Inquisitor did not withdraw to his private quarters, nor did he retreat into the austere halls of command. Instead, he descended to the lower decks of the flagship, a place where command rarely lingered. It was there, in the crowded mess halls and the humming dormitories, that he listened. He needed to hear the voices of the doomed. Among the ratings, whispers had grown into a constant murmur, one no edict could silence. The words Exterminatus and Tarsus drifted in and out of conversation like a curse, a word so heavy that even saying it aloud seemed to risk bringing it to life. Kyle moved among them in plain cloak and armor, his presence concealed, though his eyes absorbed everything. In a dim-lit mess hall, a group of soldiers shared a single flask of recaf, their voices hushed. One was young, his armor still too large for his frame. He spoke of his sister, who lived on Tarsus, working the Manufactoria presses. He whispered that if the order came, she would be nothing but ash scattered in the void. The others offered no comfort, for there was none to give. They sat in silence, each one thinking of names and faces that might be caught in the firestorm. Kyle carried that boy's words like a knife twisting in his chest. Later, he found himself in the shrine deck, where the air was thick with incense and sweat, where hundreds knelt shoulder to shoulder before the icons of the Emperor. Their prayers rose like a storm, desperate and unyielding. One old priest's voice cut above the rest, cracked and trembling, yet carrying the fire of devotion. The Emperor does not abandon. He tests, he weighs us in his balance. Even if the fire falls, it will be his hand, not the hand of traitors. The crowd roared their assent, but Kyle saw the fear in their eyes. Faith was their shield, but fear gnawed at its edges. It was not only the crew who carried fear. Messages streamed in from the planet itself, voxcasts intercepted by the flagship's Auspex arrays. Most were garbled, coded or fragmented by interference, but some slipped through clearly enough. A woman's voice begging for her children to be spared, a regiment of the Astra Militarum swearing loyalty, even as rumors spread of their impending death. A manufactorum foreman insisting that production quotas had been met, that no heresy had taken root. Each voice was another nail in Kyle's heart. In his private chamber that night, he listened to the recordings again, alone in the glow of a single lumen. The voices echoed off the iron walls, each one a reminder that behind the writ's cold decree were lives that still fought, still prayed, still clung to loyalty. His fingers hovered over the activation rune that would summon the council again, but he did not press it. Not yet. He needed more than evidence. He needed certainty. The Emperor demanded vigilance. But in the quiet of that chamber, Cale asked himself if vigilance had become cruelty. Was it vigilance to doubt every loyal subject until they proved themselves with blood? Was it vigilance to destroy a world because it faltered? Because it staggered under the weight of endless war? Or was that cowardice wrapped in faith, a refusal to believe in anything but fire? The lumen flickered, the voices faded. Cale sat in silence, head bowed, and for the first time in years, he realized that he no longer knew which path was true. And outside his chamber, the fleet waited, the crews prayed, and a world turned beneath them, unaware how close it stood to its end. Cale's resolve to seek the truth carried him once more into the depths of the void-born city that was his flagship. The vessel, a mountain of adamantine and sacred circuitry, had become a microcosm of the Imperium itself. Fractured by rumor, bound together by faith, and straining under the weight of endless war. He moved along its arterial corridors with purpose, his retinue at a distance, allowing him to pass more as a shadow than as the hand of judgment he truly was. In one of the infirmary decks, he found the wounded gathered like relics of forgotten wars. Veterans of the Astra Militarum filled the cots, their bodies broken not on Tarsus but on other front lines. Yet now, as whispers spread of the planet's fate, they spoke of it as though it were their own death. A grizzled sergeant with one arm replaced by a clattering augmetic leaned toward Cale, not recognizing him beneath his hood. If the Inquisition burns that world, they burn our brothers and sisters. We bled for those people. We fought beside them. They cannot be condemned so lightly. His voice cracked, more from despair than defiance. Others nodded, eyes hollow with resignation. Even among the battle-hardened, there was no appetite for the slaughter of innocents. From there, Cale made his way into the data vaults, seeking not the voices of flesh but of machines. Magos Dorex had resisted his probing, but Cale's authority pried open doors sealed by sacred ciphers. The cogitators thrummed with ancient power, spitting out reams of data upon command. Production quotas, population figures, patterns of religious observance, all compiled into endless columns of numbers. Cale scoured them for signs of rebellion, for patterns that could betray heretical activity. What he found instead were the unmistakable signs of collapse. The tithes demanded had risen year upon year, even as resources dwindled. Output had declined, not because of betrayal, but because the flesh of Tarsus was being ground down to dust. Workers starved. Manufactoria consumed themselves in sparks and fumes. And still the demands from Terra had risen higher. The data told no tale of chaos or treason. It told the tale of a world strangled by the Imperium itself. But data was cold, and Cale knew it could not sway those who demanded proof of faith's decay. He needed more, something undeniable, and so he turned his gaze once again to the Vox streams, where unfiltered cries continued to rise from the surface. This time he listened not only to intercepted messages, but to open transmissions, pleas that broke through even the most secure channels. A commander of the Astra Militarum, voice shaking but resolute, spoke. "We have no heresy here. My men die daily in defense of this world, and still they kneel before the Emperor's icons. If you condemn us, then know you condemn loyal soldiers." Another transmission carried the voice of a planetary governor, his tone raw with desperation. "Supplies have failed. Quotas could not be met, but we have not faltered in faith. I swear it upon the Golden Throne itself. There is no treachery here. Only exhaustion, only devotion stretched beyond its limits." Cale closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. In their voices he heard the same truth he had seen in the Manufactoria and the Hab blocks. Not rebellion, but loyalty. Not corruption, but suffering. And yet he knew how Severian would dismiss it all. Weakness, the chaplain would say, and weakness is heresy. The Inquisitor rose from the Vox chamber and walked the long path back toward the command decks. The corridors seemed darker than before, the hymns of the crew less certain. Every man and woman aboard carried the same silent question in their hearts. When would the fire fall? Kyle carried that question too, heavier with each passing moment. He had sought to hear the voices of the doomed, and he had heard them, clearer, truer, and more painful than he had expected. They were not whispers of corruption. They were not cries of treachery. They were the voices of a people clinging to faith in the face of betrayal. As he stepped into the shadow of the Strategium once more, Kale realized that the burden of choice was growing sharper, like the edge of a blade pressed against his throat. To remain silent was to be complicit. To speak was to invite war not only with his enemies but with his allies. And still, the writ lay waiting. The Strategium was a cathedral of iron and light, its vaulted ceilings carved with sigils of the Inquisition, its walls aglow with shifting star charts. The central table burned with hololithic projections of Tarsus, Manufactoria ruins belching smoke, spires crumbling beneath orbital bombardments, Vox bursts intercepted and catalogued like insects pinned to parchment. Chaplain Severian stood before the great display, his black armor gleaming with the austerity of the Reclusium, purity seals flapping against his chest plate. His Crozius, a weapon and relic in one, hung at his side like a thundercloud ready to strike. Around him, the command cadre had gathered, officers of the fleet, adepts of the Mechanicus, and lesser inquisitorial functionaries. Kyle entered in silence, and all eyes shifted toward him. "You have listened, Inquisitor," Severian intoned, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 sermons. "You have walked among the wounded, the broken, the despairing. You have heard their pleas. Tell us, what conclusion do you draw?" Kale's jaw tightened. This was the crucible he had sought to delay, but delay was no longer possible. He spoke evenly, though the weight in his chest made every word feel like a stone dragged upward from the abyss. "I have found no evidence of chaos upon Tarsus. No sigils, no rituals, no corruption of the soul. Their faith remains intact, though strained. What we see is not rebellion, but exhaustion. The planet bleeds because the Imperium has bled it dry." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but Severian raised his hand, and silence fell as though imposed by decree. The chaplain's eyes, cold, fanatical, unwavering, bored into Kyle's. "You mistake weakness for innocence. Exhaustion breeds doubt. Doubt breeds heresy. The seed is planted, Inquisitor, whether you have chosen to see it or not. If Tarsus is not burned now, then chaos will reap it soon enough. Mercy today is damnation tomorrow." Kyle felt the room's gaze weigh heavily upon him. The admirals and commanders leaned subtly toward Severian's words. They offered the clarity of doctrine, the simplicity of fire. Kyle's own truth, complex, human, fragile, was harder to wield in this place of iron and absolutes. He drew a breath and spoke again, voice sharpened now. "And what, chaplain, do you call mercy? Is it mercy to annihilate the faithful before their faith has failed? To condemn children who still cry prayers at night? To erase soldiers who still die in the Emperor's name? I say this: if we wield the torch so eagerly, we shall soon burn away all that we claim to protect." For a moment, silence held. Then Severian stepped closer, his shadow falling over Kale. "You tread dangerously close to sympathy, Inquisitor. And sympathy is but another word for compromise. Would you stake your soul and ours upon the word of starving peasants? Upon the weeping of a planetary governor who has already failed his tithe? The Emperor demands strength, not excuses." The chamber's air grew thick with tension, the unseen presence of the Emperor's judgment looming over every syllable. Kale met Severian's gaze and did not yield. "The Emperor demands truth. The truth is this: I will not sanction Exterminatus. Not while the world yet clings to loyalty. Not while its people die with his name still upon their lips. gasps echoed softly, a ripple of shock across the gathered. For an inquisitor to defy the will of a chaplain of the Adeptus Astartes was peril enough. To defy the logic of destruction in a time of suspicion was greater still. Kyle knew the weight of his words could fracture the fragile alliance holding this fleet together. Severian's silence was worse than his fury. The chaplain studied him, eyes narrowing to slits of judgment. Then at last he spoke, each word like the tolling of a funeral bell. Then you, Kyle, will bear the responsibility. Should Tarsus fall to corruption, should even one demon's claw rend the veil there, their blood will be upon your hands. And when that day comes, it is not the governor, nor the soldiers, nor the children who shall answer for it. It is you. The strategium remained frozen in silence, every officer and adept unwilling to breathe lest they be noticed in this clash of titans. Kael inclined his head, though the motion felt as heavy as a chain around his neck. So be it, I will bear it. Severian's expression was carved from stone. Then pray your judgment proves worthy of his gaze. The chaplain turned, his crozier sparking faintly with restrained energy, and strode from the chamber. The others hesitated, then followed, leaving Kael alone before the hololithic world of Tarsus, its surface still lit with the faint glow of desperate transmissions. He stared at it, his reflection faint in the glass and firelight overlay. He had chosen his path, but in the dark silence that followed, he wondered, had he spared a world of the faithful, or had he merely postponed its damnation? The voices of the doomed still echoed in his ears. The void above Tarsus was an ocean of shadows, its silence broken only by the faint rumble of the fleet's reactors and the occasional shiver of auger pings across the strategium. Ships of the Imperium drifted like cathedrals in orbit, their hulls carved with the icons of the Aquila, their weapon batteries glimmering faintly as if eager to speak the language of annihilation. Yet for all their strength they remained still, awaiting the command that had not come. Within the inquisitorial sanctum aboard the flagship, Kael knelt in the dim light of a single lumen candle. The flame guttered in the recycled air, casting his features in broken chiaroscuro. He had spoken his decision. He had set himself against the chaplain and those who would choose fire without hesitation. Now the silence of the fleet was the silence of judgment withheld. Every passing hour, he knew, was weighed against him. His thoughts were not with the admirals or the Astartes, however, but with the planet beneath. Through the narrow viewing slit of his chamber, he could just glimpse the dying world. Clouds of ash drifted through its atmosphere, storms of soot and fire spreading like bruises across its surface. He imagined the people there still clinging to life in broken hives and ruined manufactoria, their voices raised to the Emperor, prayers carried upward in hope of salvation. Perhaps some believed the fleet above waited to deliver them, not to condemn them. That fragile illusion of hope was a cruelty in itself. The vox grill at the door cracked open, and a servitor's flat tone interrupted his silence. "Inquisitor Kyle, you are summoned." He rose, his bones aching as if the gravity itself sought to press him into submission. When he entered the strategium again, the tension was sharper, colder than before. Severian stood at the table, but now another figure dominated the chamber. Lord Admiral Varaxis, commander of the fleet. His armor was a fusion of navy regalia and void-hardened plate, and his face bore the weary calm of a man who had ordered extermination before and had learned not to flinch. "Kyle," Varaxis said, his voice like iron chains dragged across stone. "The chaplain has made his recommendation. His counsel is clear. Yet I will not order fire without your final word. You have claimed Tarsus may yet be saved. Prove it. Convince us." The hololithic image shifted, showing close-range feeds of Tarsus. Spires broken like teeth, seas blackened with oil and ash, endless refugee columns winding through streets where the dead lay unburied. In the manufactoria, furnaces glowed faintly where survivors attempted to forge weapons from scraps. In shattered temples, priests still lifted censers of incense, though their voices were hoarse, their vestments ragged. Kyle felt every eye upon him. He could have chosen the easy path now, simply to relent, to whisper the single word that would end it, to consign the planet to oblivion and end the debate. He could already hear Severian's breath, taut with anticipation, as if waiting for Kyle to falter. Instead, Kyle's voice carried clear and deliberate. Look upon them. They are broken, yes, but not faithless. You see ruin, I see endurance. Even in the ashes they build. Even in the shadow of starvation they pray. That is not heresy. That is loyalty beyond reason. If the Emperor demands sacrifice, Tarsus has given it. To demand more is not strength. It is vanity disguised as zeal. The chamber stirred, but Varaxis remained silent. Severian's glare was a storm barely restrained. And when their loyalty fails tomorrow? When chaos whispers into their weakness and they kneel to the ruinous powers, will you still sing their praises, Kyle? How many times have we seen this pattern unfold, and worlds fall because we hesitated? Kale turned to him, every muscle rigid with defiance. And how many times has the torch been raised too soon, incinerating faith that still held firm? Do you know the names of those children, Chaplain? Those soldiers? Or do you call them all heretic with the same breath? We speak of probabilities, of shadows, of suspicion, but faith cannot be measured by augur pings. Faith is measured in blood, and Tarsus still bleeds for the Emperor. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. Varaxis's eyes narrowed, as if weighing Kale upon a scale no man could see. At last he said, "Your words stay my hand for now, but I will not hold back the fleet forever. If you claim this world still has worth, then show us more than rhetoric. Give us reason to believe Tarsus can stand." Kale bowed his head, though within his chest dread stirred like a coiled serpent. He had won a reprieve, nothing more. And now the burden would be heavier still. To prove a world's survival to those who had already written its death was a task worthy of damnation. Beneath the hololithic light, the planet burned, its fate balanced on the fragile edge of faith and fire. Gale left the strategium with the weight of the Admiral's words crushing against his ribs. He had not bought salvation. He had purchased only time, and time was a cruel currency. The corridors of the flagship stretched before him like veins of iron, lit by guttering lumen strips, their shadows deepened by the hum of distant machinery. The menials who passed him kept their eyes lowered, whispering prayers beneath their breath, as though his presence itself carried judgment. Perhaps in their eyes it did. He found Magos Dorex in the engine sanctum, where cyclopean pistons moved like the breathing of some mechanical titan. The air was thick with sacred oils and static, the atmosphere charged with the hymns of binary cant. Dorex stood before a cogitator bank, his mechadendrites weaving a pattern of motion more like ritual than labor. "You come to me not for truth," the Magos said without turning, his vox grill grinding with faint distortion. "You come to me because you need evidence dressed in the robes of logic. But data will not sway zealots, Inquisitor. You know this." Kyle stepped closer, his eyes fixed upon the glowing streams of numbers scrolling across the cogitator's displays. "Then help me weave truth into something undeniable. Tarsus is failing, yes, but not to heresy. Its fall is born of our own demands. If I can prove that, if I can show the fleet that we are the authors of its wounds, perhaps I can turn their wrath." At last, Dorex turned, one lens flaring brighter than the other. "And what if you succeed? What if you prove them innocent? Will you not still doom them? The Imperium does not forgive weakness, and weakness, as your chaplain insists, is heresy by another name." Kale's voice was ironclad, though his hands trembled beneath his robes. Then let the Emperor himself judge whether loyalty born of suffering is weakness. I will not consign them to ash because others lack the patience to see their faith." The Magos did not answer, but one mechadendrite extended a data slate toward Kale. Within its runes flickered charts of dwindling yields, starvation tallies and work quotas rising beyond human endurance. A weapon forged of truth, sharp enough to wound even the pride of zealots. Kale took it, feeling its weight as if it were already bloodied. Later he walked once more through the hab decks of his ship, seeking not the strength of data, but the testimony of voices. Refugees from Tarsus had been brought aboard, survivors plucked from the surface before the blockade sealed all ingress. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies wasted, but still they clung to icons of the Aquila, to rosaries, to battered copies of the Imperial Creed. One woman, clutching a child whose face was streaked with soot, looked to Kale as though she somehow sensed his purpose. "Tell me, Lord," she whispered, "will the Emperor save us?" Kyle's throat closed. He wanted to say yes, to promise that her devotion would be rewarded, that the light of Terra would shield her, and the millions like her. But he could not. He could not speak falsehood while carrying the writ of Exterminatus in his satchel. Instead, he laid his hand upon hers, the only answer he could give, and moved on before her question could carve any deeper into his soul. When he returned to the Strategium, Severian was waiting. The chaplain's armor gleamed like a shrine, purity seals fluttering from every plate, and his eyes burned with the cold certainty of a fanatic. "You delay, Kyle," he said, his voice resonant as a cathedral bell. "Each hour spent in doubt is another hour for corruption to breed below. Your pity blinds you. Faith is not proven in tears or hunger. It is proven in strength. Tarsus is weak. You know what must be done." Kale placed the data slate upon the hololith table, and yet it has not fallen. Despite everything, despite famine, despite ruin, despite neglect, it still kneels to the Emperor. That is strength, perhaps stronger than you or I. Severian's lips curled, not in anger but in disdain. You dress cowardice in poetry, but words cannot shield a world. Fire can. The Admiral said nothing, but his eyes lingered on the slate, its numbers glowing like sparks in the gloom. His silence was the only reprieve Kale won that night, and it was a silence heavy with judgment yet to come. Above them all, the world burned, awaiting its final sentence. The fleet hung in orbit like a crown of fire, its silence heavier than the weight of its guns. Every officer, every crewman, every soldier aboard those starships felt the stillness as a storm building in the void. Whispers traveled faster than Vox signals carried from deck to deck. The Inquisitor defied the chaplain, the Admiral hesitated, and a world below burned in limbo between salvation and annihilation. The tension itself became another kind of weapon, gnawing at loyalty, sharpening doubts, and feeding the gnawing hunger for resolution. Kyle stood at the edge of the Strategium once more, the hollow projectors bathing his features in pale light. Before him rotated the scarred globe of Tarsus, its continents choked by ash storms, its oceans reduced to swirling pools of blackened poison. A lesser man might have flinched from its image, but Kale gazed with the intensity of a surgeon cutting into diseased flesh. Admiral Varaxis paced the chamber, his boots echoing against the cold floor. "The longer we hold our fire, the more this becomes weakness in the eyes of Terra," he said, his tone carefully measured. Already the Vox relays carry whispers of indecision. Commanders in other sectors are watching. They expect resolve. Kyle did not lift his gaze. "Resolve without truth is madness, Admiral. We do not fight orcs or Tyranids here. We are judging the lives of billions of Imperials. That judgment demands clarity, not haste." The chaplain's voice struck like a hammer, cutting through the air. "Clarity? Look below. See the ruins, the chaos of starving mobs, the broken manufactoria. The planet is already a graveyard, Kale. You claim their prayers prove their faith, but prayers will not forge weapons, nor hold back the ruinous powers. Their weakness condemns them, no matter how loudly they chant the creed. Kale turned toward him, his expression taut with fury held in check. And yet those prayers endure. Do you not see? It is easy to praise the Emperor in triumph. It is far harder to praise him when the skies fall and the ground is ash. Tarsus proves its faith not in victory but in suffering. If you burn them now, you burn loyalty itself. Severian stepped closer, his armor groaning like a living cathedral. Loyalty is meaningless if it cannot resist corruption. You gamble that their faith will hold, but I do not gamble with heresy. Better to burn a loyal world than risk birthing a traitor one. The words struck like chains across the chamber. For a moment no one spoke. Then Varaxis exhaled, long and heavy, his gaze shifting between the two men like a duelist watching for the fatal strike. I tire of this debate. The fleet requires a decision. If Tarsus is to be given a chance, then it must be more than sentiment. Show us proof that this world still serves the Imperium. Kale produced the data slate once more, its runes glowing in the gloom. Here, their quotas collapsed not from treachery but from exhaustion. Their manufactoria consumed themselves to meet demands that no flesh could sustain. And yet even as they starved, they bent their backs, they sent their dead into the fires, they endured. This is not betrayal, it is sacrifice. They are victims of our own hunger, not chaos. The Admiral studied the figures, his face unreadable. Severian did not even glance at them. His eyes locked only on Kale with the burning certainty of a zealot. Numbers mean nothing, the chaplain said. Faith is not measured in data, it is measured in fire. Kyle's voice sharpened like a blade unsheathed. Then perhaps it is not Tarsus that must be judged, but us. We demand tithes until worlds collapse. We starve them, we scourge them. And when they cannot rise, we call them traitors. Tell me, chaplain, when do we stop calling cruelty faith? When does the fire consume not heresy, but the Imperium itself? The chamber fell to silence. Even the servitors ceased their humming canticles, as though the machine spirits themselves recoiled from the confrontation. Varaxis finally spoke, his voice low but thunderous. Enough. I will grant Tarsus one final chance. Not words, not numbers, proof. A demonstration of their loyalty that no one here can deny. If such proof comes, they live. If not... His gaze flicked to Kale, then to Severian. The fire falls. Kyle bowed his head, though within him the weight of the ultimatum coiled like a blade above his neck. Proof. Proof that could silence zealotry. Proof that could shield billions. He did not yet know what form it might take, only that the fate of Tarsus, and perhaps his own soul, now hung upon its discovery. Outside the chamber, the void was vast and silent, but the world below groaned beneath the weight of its dying breath. Kale did not sleep. The thought of it seemed obscene when the fate of billions balanced upon a knife's edge. He walked the silent corridors of the flagship as if pacing the interior of his own mind, each echo of his boots against steel, a reminder of time slipping away. He had been given an ultimatum. Proof beyond rhetoric, proof beyond data, proof so undeniable that even Severian could not reduce it to ashes. But what proof could a dying world provide that would silence zealotry? What testimony could outweigh the certainty of fire? The answer did not come from the void, nor from the endless scrolls of data scripts. It came from a voice, faint and ragged, filtering through the ship's vox relays. At first, Kale thought it was another of the desperate transmissions he had intercepted. But this one bore no fear, no pleading. It was the voice of a priest, hoarse but steady, rising from a broken cathedral on Tarsus. "We are the faithful," the man intoned, his words echoing with the resonance of a litany. "We are the dust of his feet, the ash of his flame, the blood of his hand. We do not falter. We do not curse. Even if the skies burn, even if fire falls, we are his. Kyle froze. His breath caught in his throat. The signal was weak, wavering, yet it spread across the relays like a contagion of faith. Other voices joined it. Soldiers, workers, children. Their prayers weaving into a single rising chorus. Not defiance, not despair, faith. A world on the brink of death, still raising its voice to the throne. Kale summoned the admiral and the chaplain to the Vox chamber, the echoes of the litany still rolling through the air. When they entered, Severian's face was a mask of disdain, but Varaxis's brow furrowed with something else. Unease. Perhaps even reverence. Listen, Kale said simply. Gesturing to the speakers, the voices swelled. Some cracked with hunger, some were broken by grief, yet all carried the same fire. We are the Emperor's. We are his. The refrain repeated again and again like a tide of faith rising against the weight of judgment. For a long moment, even Severian did not speak. His lips moved silently, perhaps in counter prayer, perhaps in anger. Finally, he broke the silence. They cling to ritual as drowning men cling to driftwood. It is not proof of strength. It is proof of desperation. Kale turned on him, his voice a blade. Desperation, and yet they do not curse him. Desperation, and yet they do not turn to chaos. Do you not see? Even at the edge of annihilation, they kneel to the Emperor. This is proof, chaplain. This is faith beyond reason. Burn them now, and you burn the truest loyalty I have ever witnessed. The Admiral remained silent for a long while, his eyes closed as the prayers rolled on. When at last he spoke, his words were measured, but there was no mistaking the weight behind them. I have seen worlds fall to chaos. I have seen faith broken in the first whisper of despair. This is something else. He turned to Severian, his voice hardening. These people still believe. To burn them would be to burn belief itself. Severian's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the hilt of his crozius. You mistake sentiment for purity. Faith is not words, it is strength. When the Xenos come, when chaos comes, prayers will not hold the line. Kale stepped closer, his eyes locked on the chaplain's. And yet without faith, what strength endures? Without belief, every fortress crumbles. Look below. Tarsus is already in ruins, yet they endure. Not with walls, not with weapons, with faith. That is the foundation of the Imperium, and you would call it weakness? The prayers continued, louder now, the chorus spreading through the decks as more Vox channels carried it, until the entire ship seemed to vibrate with the sound. Even the most hardened voidsmen paused in their duties, some bowing their heads, others simply listening with wide, uncertain eyes. Admiral Varaxis raised his hand. Enough, I will not order fire tonight. This display has bought Tarsus another dawn. Severian's glare burned hotter than any star. But he did not speak. The decision for the moment was out of his hands. Kale exhaled slowly, though he knew this was no victory. It was only a reprieve, fragile as the faith that had bought it. Yet for one night at least, the world still lived. The dawn that followed was not the dawn of salvation. Tarsus's skies were still bruised with ash, the light of its star muted into a sickly pallor. Yet for all its ruin, the world still lived and its prayers still rose. From orbit, Kale watched as fractured Vox bursts continued to climb through the storm-laden atmosphere, voices chanting the same refrain, "We are his." It had become a litany that spread beyond the planet itself, echoing through the void, threading its way into the hearts of those who listened. Even aboard the fleet, men and women repeated the words in silence, as though unwilling to let the flame die. Kyle stood in the observation sanctum, his cloak gathered close around him. He had witnessed countless worlds rise and fall, but never had he felt the gravity of one cling to his soul, as Tarsus now did. Every transmission that broke through the static was a reminder. This was not merely a planet of figures and quotas. not just a cog in the endless machine of the Imperium. It was a place of living faith, fragile yet unbroken. But faith was not enough. He knew that. The reprieve granted by Admiral Varaxis was already cracking under pressure. Terra demanded results. Other sectors looked for precedent. Hesitation was dangerous, perhaps even damning. For the High Lords, for the Ecclesiarchy, for the Astartes, delay could be mistaken for weakness. In the void above a broken world, weakness was as deadly as any Xenos fleet. The sanctum door hissed open, and Severian entered, his presence filling the chamber like a storm. His Crozius hung at his side, but his posture was coiled with restrained violence. The prayers echoing faintly through the vox did not soften him. If anything, they seemed to sharpen the cold fury in his eyes. "You think this chorus changes anything?" he said, voice low but thrumming with disdain. "It does not. Faith that does not manifest in steel is only sound, and sound cannot halt the corruption that will come. They will fall, Kyle. All you do is delay the inevitable." Kale did not look at him. Perhaps. Or perhaps this is what faith is meant to be. Not the thunder of armies, not the steel of fortresses, but the refusal to yield even when all else is lost. Tell me, Chaplain, if the Emperor himself watches, do you think he would see weakness, or would he see devotion? Severian's gauntleted hand flexed against the hilt of his weapon. "You dress despair as strength, Inquisitor. I see only a sickness left to rot, and I will not let your hesitation make me complicit in its spread." Kyle finally turned, his eyes burning with quiet fire. "Then strike me down. If my refusal to condemn them is heresy, then name me traitor here and now. But understand this, if you do, you will not kill me. You will kill every voice rising from below. You will silence the last prayers of a world that has given everything to the throne." The chamber rang with silence, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's reactors. For a heartbeat, Kale thought Severian might do it. That his zeal would spill blood in orbit as easily as on the battlefield. But the chaplain's hand stilled, his fury folding back into the cold armor of discipline. "You test my patience, Kale," he said, his tone almost a growl. "But patience is not infinite. I will not be swayed forever by your rhetoric. When the Emperor's enemies come to claim this world, your faith will burn with it." He turned and strode from the sanctum, his armor's echo lingering long after he had gone. Kyle exhaled, his heart pounding as though he had fought a battle. Perhaps he had. The war for Tarsus was not fought with bolters and blades, not yet. It was fought with words, with silence, with the weight of judgment hanging over every soul in orbit. And Kale knew the final act was coming. The Emperor's light was distant, faint across the gulf of stars. But in that moment, Kale felt it burn more fiercely than ever within him. He would carry that fire to the end, whatever the cost. Kale did not sleep. Inquisitors rarely did when the weight of judgment pressed upon them. But this was more than duty. This was conscience. He sat alone in the strategium chamber, maps of the sector ghosting across the hololith table, lines of supply and defense shimmering like veins of fragile light across the void. Every plan, every movement came to the same conclusion. Tarsus was indefensible. Logic demanded withdrawal. Faith demanded sacrifice. And Kale stood at the knife's edge between them. The chamber doors opened once more, though this time it was not Severian. Admiral Varaxis entered, his armor polished and immaculate despite the exhaustion that lined his features. The old man was a fortress of discipline, his voice as steady as the void itself. "Inquisitor," Varaxis said, bowing his head slightly in respect. "The fleet is restless. Word spreads faster than sanction. There are whispers among the captains. Some demand reinforcement. Others demand bombardment. None accept silence." Kale's fingers tightened around the edge of the hololith table. "And what do you demand, Admiral?" Varaxis studied him for a long moment. the void lights dancing across his scarred face. "I demand clarity. The Imperium cannot live by half measures. If we are to save Tarsus, we must commit utterly. If we are to destroy it, we must burn it without hesitation. The fleet cannot linger in purgatory." Kyle almost smiled at the word. Purgatory. That was what this orbit had become, a waiting room for damnation. Before he could answer, the hololith flickered. A transmission cut through the static, stronger than the fractured prayers before. A woman's voice, weary but unyielding, rose into the chamber. "We are the children of Tarsus. The ruins do not break us. The ash does not choke us. The Emperor does not abandon us. If you hear us, know this, we are not lost." Kyle closed his eyes. The voice was raw, cracked with exhaustion, yet it carried the weight of 1,000,000 souls clinging to the last threads of hope. It was not the thunder of sermons or the polished cadence of preachers. It was truth, and it seared him more deeply than any threat of chaos ever had. Varaxis said nothing, though his jaw tightened. The Admiral was no priest, but even he felt the resonance of those words. Kyle spoke at last, his voice quiet but resolute. "Admiral, you will hold the fleet in orbit. No bombardment, no retreat. We stand vigil with them." Varaxis frowned. "A vigil is not a strategy. The orcs regroup. The heretics will not rest. We invite annihilation by waiting." Kale turned to him, fire burning behind weary eyes. "Then let annihilation come. Let the galaxy see what faith means. Let every system hear the defiance of a world the Imperium has abandoned. If Tarsus falls, it will not fall as a corpse to be forgotten. It will fall as a beacon that burns until its last breath." Varaxis regarded him in silence. The old admiral was no stranger to sacrifice. He had cast away more soldiers than Kale could count. Yet something in the Inquisitor's words stirred him, something he could not easily crush beneath duty. At last he inclined his head. "As you command, Inquisitor. But understand this, if you are wrong, Tarsus dies screaming, and her screams will haunt us all." He turned, his cloak trailing like a shadow, leaving Kyle alone once more. The chamber darkened as the hololith dimmed. Kale sank into the silence, feeling the weight of choices pressing down upon him. Severian would call him weak. The ecclesiarchy would brand him reckless. Even the Ordo Hereticus might one day name him traitor. But none of that mattered, because below, in the ashes of Tarsus, voices still rose. Not in fear, not in despair, but in stubborn, unbreakable faith. And as long as those voices endured, so too would he. The sky over Tarsus split open. What began as a murmur of distant thunder became a storm that tore the heavens apart. Green fire streaked across the night as orc rocks plunged from orbit, their crude engines howling like beasts unleashed from the void. Each impact shattered the earth, vomiting ash and dust into the air, turning day into a perpetual twilight. The ground itself groaned beneath the bombardment, as if the world had grown tired of bearing the weight of its tormentors. The defenders of Tarsus stood their posts regardless. Imperial Guard regiments, their numbers hollowed by attrition, clutched laser guns with trembling hands and prayed through vox grills. Manufacturing workers who had never known war wielded pickaxes and welding torches as makeshift weapons. The Skitari of the Forge March stalked the ruins with red-lit optics, their chants of Binharic machine prayer mingling with the screams of the dying. Each soul, whether soldier or serf, knew the truth. The orcs were not coming to conquer. They were coming to feast. Inquisitor Kale watched from the walls of the inner bastion, his cloak whipping in the ashen wind. His face was lit by the fires of the first impacts, and though his eyes betrayed exhaustion, they also burned with resolve. He had heard the voice of Tarsus rise from the ashes. Now he would see if that voice could withstand the storm. Severian stood beside him, impassive as ever, his Terminator armor a slab of iron against the world's collapse. The chaplain's crozius hummed faintly in the stormlight, the weapon less a symbol of comfort than of judgment. "You chose this fate," Severian rumbled, his voice carrying above the shrieking winds. "You bound yourself to them. Now you will burn with them." Cale did not flinch. Better to burn with them than to abandon them. The Imperium was not built on retreat. Severian's skull helm turned slightly, unreadable. The Imperium was built on sacrifice. You mistake one for the other. Before Cale could answer, the first orc warband broke through the outer ruins. They surged forward like an unstoppable tide, crude banners raised high, their guttural war cries shaking the walls as much as the impacts of their ramshackle artillery. Their weapons barked flame and smoke, rattling against the bastion's defenses. But their true strength was in their momentum, the savage hunger of numbers that could not be reasoned with. The Astra Militarum opened fire. Dozens of las beams lanced into the dust, burning holes through green flesh. Yet for every orc that fell, 2 more leapt forward, trampling the corpses of their kin. The air thickened with ozone and blood, with the metallic tang of las fire mingling with the feral stink of alien sweat. Cale gripped the railing, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. This was not strategy. This was endurance. Every second they held was another second that the name of Tarsus carved itself into the void. He would not let the galaxy forget. Then the ground shook again. Not from the orcs this time, but from something greater. A second rock struck not far from the bastion, its hull cracking open like a rotten fruit. From its belly poured monstrosities larger than any mortal defender could face. Orc war machines, engines of scrap and brutality stomped into the fray, their clanking steps turning rubble into dust. Each was a walking cathedral of noise and violence, patched together with stolen plating, glyphs daubed in blood, and cannons that roared like ancient beasts. The guard line faltered. Men broke. Voxcasters screamed prayers for reinforcement. Some fired until their laser guns overheated and fused, then charged forward with bayonets that snapped against crude orc armor. Still they fought. Still they bled. And above it all the voice returned. Through the Voxnet, through the static and the fear, the same woman's voice Cale had heard before rose once again. "We are the children of Tarsus. We do not kneel. We do not yield. Let the stars witness us." Her words were drowned by gunfire, yet somehow they endured, weaving through the chaos like a thread of light. Guardsmen shouted them back through clenched teeth. Skitarii repeated them in bursts of code. Even the dying whispered them as their blood darkened the dust. Cale closed his eyes, and for the briefest moment, he imagined the Emperor himself listening. And then the orcs reached the bastion gates. The world shook beneath the impact. The shadow had descended. The gates of the bastion groaned as though they were living things under torment. Massive plates of plasteel and ceramite bent inward with every hammer blow from orc claws, and every shrieking round from their looted cannons. Sparks cascaded from the seams, raining down on the defenders like falling stars. Every man, woman, and machine within the fortress knew what was coming. Cale descended from the ramparts and moved into the heart of the bastion. He passed lines of soldiers too young to be veterans, too broken to be fresh, their faces streaked with soot and blood. Commissar barked orders, her voice raw from hours of screaming. Yet even she faltered when another quake rattled the earth. It was no longer the sound of a siege. It was the sound of inevitability. Severian strode at Cale's side, each step of his massive frame a drumbeat of doom. His crozius arcanum pulsed with caged lightning, its head glowing faintly blue in the gloom. The chaplain did not speak, and Cale found the silence heavier than any sermon. For the first time since their quarrel began, Cale wondered if Severian saw him not as heretic or idealist, but as something rarer, an equal waiting for judgment. The gates broke. Metal screamed as the barriers split apart. And with a roar that rattled the lungs of every soul within, the orcs poured inside. They were a flood of crude muscle and rusted steel, hacking and bellowing, their eyes mad with the thrill of slaughter. The bastion's inner courtyard became a furnace of sound, las fires strobing like lightning, autocannons barking thunder, chainswords shrieking as they tore into green flesh. Kyle drew his bolt pistol and fired, each shot tearing apart an orc skull in a burst of bone and gore. He moved through the chaos with calculated fury, not as a general above the fray, but as a man unwilling to stand idle while history was written in blood. Each enemy slain was another heartbeat stolen for Tarsus. The Skitarii fought like statues brought to murderous life, their augmentic limbs striking with mechanical precision. Binary hymns blared from their vox grills, war songs not of glory, but of endurance, as if the machine spirits themselves refused to cede the fortress. Yet even their precision faltered under the weight of sheer numbers. For every orc that fell to a galvanic rifle, 2 more shoved forward, trampling the twitching corpses of their kin. Kale stumbled against a broken column, reloading as he did. His mind replayed the woman's voice again and again, her vow echoing above the screams. "We are the children of Tarsus. We do not kneel." He whispered the words under his breath as if they were a shield against despair. Then the courtyard shook. Through the shattered gate lumbered a gargantuan orc warlord, clad in a patchwork of plates stolen from tanks and bastions alike, its frame bristling with crude weapons and jagged trophies. The brute's massive claw dripped with blood, and its laughter boomed like artillery. It towered over the defenders, a god of iron and madness. And with a single sweep of its weapon, it crushed a squad of guardsmen into mangled ruin. Panic rippled through the line. Kale felt it like a cold wind, the moment when men remember they are mortal and think only of survival. If the warlord reached the heart of the bastion, Tarsus would fall within minutes. Severian stepped forward. The chaplain's Crozius flared with righteous energy as he raised it high, his voice finally breaking the silence. "Children of the Emperor, stand your ground. Let your blood be the mortar of this bastion. Let your courage be the walls that do not break. Fight, and make of this moment an offering the stars will never forget." The words struck like thunder, and the defenders rallied. A dozen laser guns fired in unison. Heavy bolters roared and flamers vomited sheets of fire across the orc horde. Yet even as the line steadied, the warlord advanced, swatting aside shells and flames as though they were gnats. Kyle leveled his bolt pistol at the beast, firing until the chamber clicked empty. The rounds sparked off crude plating, leaving the monster unscathed. He knew then what must happen. Severian was already charging. The chaplain's armored bulk crashed into the orc warlord with the force of a thunderclap. His Crozius striking again and again, sparks and gore flying with each blow. The warlord bellowed and swung its claw, tearing chunks of ceramite from Severian's armor. But the chaplain did not yield. It was not a duel of mortals. It was a collision of gods, a battle fit for myth, fought beneath the gaze of a dying world. Kale watched, torn between awe and dread. For in that instant he understood. This was not victory. This was sacrifice, and the cost would soon be revealed. The clash between Chaplain Severian and the orc warlord became the axis around which the entire bastion seemed to spin. Every gunshot, every scream, every desperate prayer faded against the thunder of their duel. The courtyard was no longer a battlefield. It was an arena carved by fate, and all who still lived bore witness. Severian's Crozius Arcanum blazed with each strike, arcs of crackling energy splitting the night, searing flesh and shattering crude armor. The warlord roared with laughter even as blows split its skin and crushed its bones. For to an orc, pain was fuel, and blood was proof of life. Its claws snapped shut with earth-shaking force, tearing through walls and pulverizing anything within reach. Sparks lit the ruins as the two giants wove death through their dance of violence. Kale pushed through the melee to keep sight of them, firing his bolt pistol into any orc foolish enough to close in. He knew the duel's outcome would decide everything. If Severian fell, the defenders would shatter. If the warlord was slain, hope might endure for another fleeting hour. He reloaded, his hands trembling with more than exhaustion. His entire mission, his choice to stay, his defiance against the Imperium's cold calculus. It all teetered on this clash of titans. The warlord bellowed, lifting Severian and hurling him across the courtyard. The chaplain struck the ground with a crash, stone and blood spraying outward. His armor dented and torn. Gasps rippled through the defenders as the orc stomped toward him, each footstep a promise of finality. Severian rose slowly, heavily, yet with defiance burning as fierce as the fires around him. The chaplain stood tall. His crozius lifted once more, glowing brighter than before, as though the Emperor's will itself burned through its circuitry. "You shall not break us," Severian roared, his voice carrying across the bastion like a cannon hymn. "Not while one breath remains, not while one heart still beats." The defenders roared with him, even as Lay's guns overheated. Even as blades dulled and arms grew heavy, they fought harder. Hope clung to Severian's defiance like flame to dry tinder. Kale felt it surge through him, burning away the exhaustion, giving him clarity sharper than a blade. But the warlord did not falter. It swung its claw with a speed that belied its bulk, striking Severian square across the chest. The impact shattered ceramite, caving armor inward with a sound like thunder breaking mountains. Severian staggered, blood spilling through his vox grill, but still he did not fall. Kale's heart clenched. He saw not a chaplain now, but a man standing at the edge of the abyss refusing to step back. The orc roared again, raising its claw for the killing strike. Kyle moved. He sprinted forward, leaping over rubble and bodies, his bolt pistol raised. His mind screamed the futility of it. A single pistol could not slay such a beast. But his body refused to yield. He fired shot after shot, each round exploding against the warlord's head, its plating sparking and cracking beneath the relentless barrage. One shot burst an eye. Another tore away half its tusk. The monster roared in fury and turned its gaze toward Kale. That was Severian's moment. With a bellow that shook even Kale's bones, the chaplain surged forward, his crozius arcing like a comet. He drove the weapon straight into the warlord's chest. Energy burst outward in a detonation of light and force, tearing through flesh, bone, and the crude machinery grafted into the orc's body. The beast roared one final time, a sound of rage and disbelief, before collapsing to the ground in a thunderous crash that split the courtyard floor. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the defenders erupted. Cheers and battle cries rose above the ruin, Lay's guns blazing anew as the tide of orcs faltered. The horde that had seemed endless broke against the bastion's walls, their confidence shaken by the fall of their godlike leader. For the first time since the siege began, victory seemed possible. Kale rushed to Severian's side. The chaplain stood but only barely. His armor was ruined, his breath shallow, blood bubbling with every word. He gripped Kyle's shoulder with a gauntleted hand, the weight of it more binding than chains. "You see now," Severian rasped through broken vox grills. "Sacrifice is the Imperium's only truth." Kyle tried to speak, but his throat closed. He knew what Severian was saying. The chaplain had not fought for victory, but to prove that dying for the Emperor was the greatest act any soul could offer. Kyle saw the nobility in it and the horror. He wanted to tell him that sacrifice meant nothing without hope. But the words died as Severian staggered forward, refusing to collapse. The orcs were not done. Already more waves gathered beyond the walls, shadows massing beneath the burning sky. The warlord's death had bought them time, but time was measured in minutes, not hours, and Cale knew the hardest choice had yet to come. The courtyard stank of blood and ozone, the acrid tang of promethium fire mingling with the copper of spilled lives. The orc warlord lay broken, its bulk smoking, twitching in spasms of fading life. Around it, the defenders roared their defiance. A chorus of human lungs and mechanical voices carried on ash-filled air. For a fleeting moment, Tarsus breathed victory, but Cale knew better. Beyond the shattered gates, the night seethed with movement. The fall of one beast had not ended the tide. Thousands more orcs still surged through the ruins, rallying now around fresh war bosses. Their shadows writhed against the firelight, endless, inevitable. The fortress walls groaned as makeshift artillery thundered anew, crude shells bursting against bastions already fractured. Victory was an illusion. All Severian had bought them was a pause. One more gasp before drowning. Severian himself stood swaying, a colossus cracked but not yet fallen. His Crozius Arcanum still burned faintly, though its light was guttering. Blood ran freely from splits in his armor, dripping in dark rivulets across the broken stone. Each breath rasped like a dying engine, yet his skull helm remained turned toward the enemy. He would not look away. "Inquisitor," the chaplain growled, his voice raw as torn iron. "The Emperor demands more. The gate cannot hold. The horde will come. You must decide." Cale's mouth was dry. He looked past Severian, across the battlements toward the void above. There hung the Imperial fleet silent, waiting. Every ship bristled with weapons capable of unmaking the world beneath. His authority could call them into action with a single command. A word, a code, and Tarsus would burn in purging fire. The thought clawed at him. To order Exterminatused would end the siege. The orcs would die screaming in flame, and the Imperium would be spared their contagion of war. It would be the clean choice, the logical choice, but it would also erase the voices that had risen from the ashes. The children of Tarsus who refused to kneel. The nameless woman whose defiance had carried across the stars. Every last soul still clinging to life in the ruins would vanish into dust. Could he do it? Could he condemn them to silence after all they had endured? Guardsmen stumbled to his side. Helmet cracked, blood matting his face. "Inquisitor," the man croaked, laser gun trembling in his grip. "We're holding, sir. The orcs are falling back for now. If you've any miracles left, now would be the time." His words were broken but defiant, and in them Cale heard the echo of the woman's broadcast. Hope did not ask for logic. It only asked for a chance. The ground shook again. Another rock slammed into the city outskirts, throwing up a tower of fire that turned the sky red. The Voxnet shrieked with overlapping voices. Orders, screams, prayers. Cale shut his eyes, drowning in the sound, feeling the weight of judgment crush him. Severian placed a gauntlet on his shoulder. The chaplain's voice was softer now, though no less stern. "There is no victory without sacrifice. Choose, Cale. Sacrifice them to save the Imperium, or sacrifice yourself to save their hope. Either way, blood must be given." Cale opened his eyes. In the distance, he could still hear her voice through the static. "We are the children of Tarsus. We do not kneel. We do not yield." His hand hovered over his command slate, fingers trembling. A single code would ignite the fleet's fury. Another code would lock them in orbit, forbidding the strike. One choice would end Tarsus in fire. The other would doom the fleet himself. And every last defender to be consumed in the storm. There was no middle ground left. The orcs roared again, their second wave hammering against the gates, shaking the very marrow of the bastion. Mortar fire shrieked overhead. The night burned. Kyle drew in a breath, steadying himself. His decision crystallized in that moment. Not as a thought, not as a calculation, but as a truth that had been growing since he first heard that voice rise from the ruins. He looked at Severian. The chaplain's skull helm hid his face, but Cale felt the weight of his gaze all the same. For the first time, neither man spoke. They simply understood. Kyle pressed his code into the slate. The code sent. The decision made. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The war still thundered. The bastion still shook. The orcs still bellowed their savage hymns to violence. Yet in that sliver of silence between command and consequence, Kyle felt the weight lift. He had chosen, not the clean arithmetic of Exterminatus, but the dirty, blood-soaked gamble of defiance. Above the world, the Imperial fleet stirred. On every bridge, every gunnery deck, officers bent over cogitators as command codes streamed in. But the order was not to fire. It was to wait, to hold orbit, to deny the cleansing flame. Murmurs rippled among the crews. Some cursed, others whispered prayers of relief. But the order was clear. The fleet remained leashed. Tarsus would stand or die on its own terms. The second orc wave struck like a tidal surge. The gates, fractured and buckling, exploded inward as crude charges detonated. Iron doors split, stone shuddered, and into the breach poured the green tide. Thousands of them howling, shooting, hacking, their crude weapons sparking as they carved into the defenders. "Hold!" Severian's voice boomed, thunderous even as his frame swayed with exhaustion. His Crozius blazed once more, and with a roar he plunged into the melee. Guardsmen followed, their laser guns spitting furious light. Kyle drew his bolt pistol, the weapon kicking in his hand as shell after shell tore orc bodies apart. The courtyard became a grinder of flesh and iron. Overhead, Valkyries screamed down through smoke, disgorging stormtroopers into the fray. Their hot-shot volleys burned glowing holes in orc armor. Basilisk guns barked from the rear lines, dropping shells into the horde. Still the orcs came, inexhaustible, every death feeding their frenzy. Kyle fought through the chaos, his coat shredded, his lungs burning with ash. He found himself back to back with Severian, the chaplain's Crozius smashing skulls like glass. "You chose," Severian growled between strikes. "Now we bleed for it." Kale fired again, point blank into a snarling orc's mouth. Better we bleed than burn. Hours blurred into slaughter. The walls were gone, reduced to jagged stumps. The city behind them was aflame, its streets rivers of ash and fire. And yet the line held. Inch by inch, body by body, the defenders refused to yield. Every guardsman's death bought another heartbeat. Every child's scream in the ruins was another reminder of what Kale had chosen. At last, the orcs faltered. Not broken, never broken, but stalled. Their momentum bled out against the unrelenting wall of human defiance. Warlords bellowed. Squigs snapped. But even they seemed to feel the shift. Then it came, a sound not of battle but of faith. From the ruins rose the voices again. Hundreds this time. Thousands. Civilians, wounded, half-starved, clutching makeshift weapons, raised their voices in defiance. They screamed the words that had carried across the void. "We are the children of Tarsus. We do not kneel. We do not yield." The cry spread like fire. Guardsmen took it up, bellowing the words as they fought. Stormtroopers echoed it. Even Severian roared it, his voice shaking the stones. The chant rose higher than artillery, higher than the orc howls, higher than fear itself. The orcs hesitated. For the first time, their brutish charge wavered, their eyes flicking uneasily across the humans who refused to break. Kale saw it. He felt it. And in that moment he understood hope was not an illusion. It was a weapon. Severian turned, bloodied helm locking on Kale. "You gave them more than a chance, Inquisitor. You gave them a war cry." The orcs roared again, mustering themselves for a third push. But Kale no longer felt despair. The tide might yet drown them, but it would not erase them. Not today. Not while Tarsus still had breath to scream. The shadow had descended. But in the heart of it burned a fire no orc could snuff. The city was in ruins. The bastion lay broken, its towers cracked, its gates shattered. its courtyards drowned in the dead. The smoke of burning hab-blocks turned the sky into a choking shroud, and beneath that pall, the survivors of Tarsus clung to existence by fingernails and faith. Kyle staggered through the rubble, his pistol empty, its last shell long spent in some nameless orc's skull. His arm hung limp, slashed open, his greatcoat burned away to rags. He could barely hear above the ringing in his ears, yet he felt the vibrations of battle still thrumming through the stone beneath his boots. The orcs had not left. They had not surrendered, but their tide was broken into snarling streams rather than a unified flood. Warlords roared commands that fell into chaos. Gangs brawled with one another even as they tore at humans. The horde was still vast, but it no longer moved as one hammer strike. That fracture had saved them. On the fractured battlements, guardsmen still fought, their laser guns smoking, their bayonets dripping gore. Civilians wielded pipes, knives, even bare fists. And everywhere Severian strode, unkillable in faith if not in flesh, his crozius slick with blood, his armor cracked but unbowed. Cale found him on the steps of the cathedral ruin, standing before a sea of battered soldiers and ash-streaked children. His vox grill crackled with static, his body trembling, but his voice carried through the smoke. Tarsus lives. The words fell like thunder. No sermon, no litany, no layered rhetoric, just truth. And the crowd roared back with a sound that was half triumph, half mourning. Cale looked at their faces. He saw the hollow eyes of the half-starved, the haunted gazes of the widowed, the 1,000-yard stares of soldiers who had seen too much. But he also saw fire. He saw a people who had stared into the maw of Exterminatus and spat in its teeth. The Inquisitor's vox clicked. The fleet still orbited above, still waiting, still ready to unleash annihilation if Cale spoke a single word. He reached for the control rune on his wrist slate. His finger hovered. The choice still lingered. Always would. Behind him, a girl no older than 10 clutched a broken las pistol, her eyes fixed on him. She was smeared with ash, barefoot, trembling, but she did not look away. Her lips moved soundlessly, repeating the words Severian had given them. "We are the children of Tarsus. We do not yield." Kyle lowered his hand. He would not give the order. Not today. The orcs howled anew, gathering for another charge. The defenders readied what weapons they had left. But as the green tide advanced, something shifted in the smoke-choked heavens. From beyond the ash clouds came the shriek of engines. Thunderhawks, sleek, predatory, descending like hawks upon prey. Their hulls bore the sigils of the Adeptus Astartes, black and red etched in flame. Bolter fire erupted from their hatches before the landing ramps even struck earth. And when they did, giants in power armor strode forth, chainswords roaring. Cale felt his knees nearly give. Reinforcements, not the cleansing flame, but angels of war. Word had reached the wider Imperium after all. Perhaps a prayer had carried. Perhaps his refusal to sanction death had bought the sliver of time needed for salvation to answer. Severian bellowed laughter, raw and broken, as he raised his crozius. "The Emperor has not forsaken us," the orcs charged. The Astartes met them in a storm of steel and fire. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse, but this time the balance was shifting. The greenskin horde, already fractured, began to collapse under the precision and fury of the Space Marines. Cale slumped against the broken wall, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. He watched the fight through a haze of blood and smoke, knowing his part was done. Tarsus would not burn by Imperial hand. Whether it would live long enough to rebuild, none could say. But it would live today. As his vision dimmed, he thought of Terra's endless chambers, of the faceless lords who signed death warrants for worlds with a flick of a stylus. He thought of the faces around him, the girl, the guardsman, Severian, all bloodied but unbroken. And he wondered, not for the first time, whether the Imperium feared its enemies more, or its own hope. The sky thundered again, not with bombardment but with victory's uncertain promise. And somewhere in that roar, Kyle thought he heard the faintest echo of the Emperor's will. Not the silence of fire, but the whisper of survival. Tarsus endured. For now,